Tonight, Vladimir Putin kills Alexei Navalny, the 47-year-old lawyer turned journalist and activist, and the great hope for a democratic future in Russia. It's the latest saber rattling in a psychological campaign by Putin to rattle the West. A quick reminder as we get going here tonight, the content you're about to see is made possible by viewers like you who support us at Patreon, YouTube, and Substack. Narativ needs you so we can keep exposing the enemies of democracy as we're doing on tonight's show. The news about Navalny's murder broke just as Vice President Kamala Harris was due to take the podium at the Munich Security Conference. Navalny's presumed widow, Yulia Navalnaya, was there as an honored guest. Despite the impossibly difficult position she found herself in, Navalnaya took to the podium and at this
opportunity to speak.
Наверное, вы все уже видели приходящие сегодня ужасные новости.
And you all heard about the horrific news.
Стоит ли мне выйти сюда или сразу лететь?
I thought, should I stand here before you or should I go back to my children? And then I thought, what would have Alexei done in my place? And I'm sure that he would have been standing here on this stage.
Я не знаю, верить или нет тем новостям, ужасным новостям, которые мы получаем только из государственных источников в России. Потому что долгие годы, и вы все это знаете, мы не можем верить Путину и путинскому правительству. Они всегда лгут. Но если это правда, я хочу, чтобы Путин, все его окружение, путинские друзья, его правительство знали, что они понесут за то, что они сделали с нашей страной, с моей семьей и с моим мужем ответственность. И этот день наступит очень скоро. И я хочу призвать все мировое сообщество, всех находящихся в этом зале, людей во всем мире, чтобы мы вместе сплотились и победили это зло, победили ужасающий режим, который сейчас в России. И этот режим и Владимир Путин должны понести персональную ответственность за все те ужасные вещи, которые они делают с моей страной, с нашей страной России в последние годы. Спасибо большое.
At this hour, we still do not have an independent source confirming that Alexei Navalny is dead. However, Vladimir Putin has tried to kill him before, and it seems that this time Putin has succeeded in his obsession. The other obsession Vladimir Putin seems to have is about US politics. For a political candidate running for re-election in his own presidential elections in Russia, it seems surprising that he has so much time to talk about American politics. Perhaps it's because Putin has a stake in the outcome of the American election. So much so that he may need a particular result in the November election to ensure his continued rule in Russia and cement his legacy. Just days after dedicating 2 hours to lambaste Joe Biden and support Donald Trump on Tucker Carlson's X show, Putin now says he supports Joe Biden for the presidency. I don't believe it for a second, and neither should you. Putin is clearly lying. I mean, Putin is interfering in US politics again. He's using disinformation and outright corruption, just like he did in 2016 and in 2020. And it's all being done in support of the same candidate, Donald J. Trump, not Joe Biden. Just days after dedicating 2 hours to lambaste Joe Biden and support Donald Trump on Tucker Carlson's show, Putin now says he supports Joe Biden for the presidency. He's obviously lying, and don't believe it for a second. Putin is interfering in US politics again, for sure. He's using disinformation and outright corruption, just like he did in 2016 and 2020. But he's doing that in support of the exact same candidate, Donald J. Trump. Putin knows that if Trump is elected, he'd have free rein to attack NATO countries. Putin wants an America that increasingly resembles Russia, where civil liberties are controlled, elections are rigged, and Congress acts as a rubber stamp for the dictator's wishes. Consider the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson's obsession with killing the $95 billion Ukraine aid bill that also provides some aid to Israel and Taiwan. Absolutely nothing, not even an actual win on immigration reform, the number one priority on the GOP agenda, was enough to get Johnson's support for the aid package. Isn't that unusual that he cares so much about Ukraine that he's willing to forego absolutely everything else? Since Trump, no American politician has been so effective at advancing Russia's interests than Mike Johnson. Withdrawing support from Ukraine is bad policy. It's bad for the economy as it stalls vital weapons production, which is needed both in Ukraine and in our military. It means the brave Ukrainians who died resisting Putin will have perished in vain. And it gives Putin Ukraine. Plus, it also brings us closer to a global confrontation involving China and Taiwan and Iran. A vote for the GOP is a vote for World War III. I know what you're thinking. Here he goes again with that Russian thing. But let's be honest. The Russia thing was a very real thing. And 20 years of asymmetric warfare may seem like a long time for us, but it's not a very long time for nations like Russia and China. Putin knows that it's all worth the effort if he can get Trump elected again. He'll neutralize his greatest foe, the United States of America. As for Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, there is very little doubt he's a Russian asset. In October 2023, the relatively unknown Mike Johnson was appointed Speaker from the ashes of Kevin McCarthy's collapsed speakership. It all happened so suddenly, in the dead of night. The sleeping bear had been there all along, just waiting for this moment, and then awoke from his slumber, seizing control of the House and replacing incompetence with treasonous. Johnson's policy decisions cannot be reasonably explained as coherent GOP policy, but they do clearly mirror Vladimir Putin's and other nations who seek to undermine America. And I'm joined live now by Rick Petrie, who's a member of the Council of Foreign Relations and a good friend of us on the show. Thanks, Rick, for joining us in tonight's show. There's so much to dig into, and you know, it's all happening at such a quick pace today that the news is quite unbelievable. I mean, this isn't even including the news regarding Donald Trump's, $355 million, judgment against him. But let's just talk about Navalny, because I think that is such a significant turn of events. What are your thoughts about this massive turn of events and the timing of it in particular?
Well, Julia said it very well in Munich. It's obviously horrific. It's further proof, if any were needed, that this is a very hard dictatorial regime. I think it's a regime that's been through several phases of hardening, and we're now at the hardest level yet, where with very little attempt at disguising it, they have taken the opportunity to murder someone who is probably the most effective opposition spokesperson and revealer of Putin's nepotism and corruption in a generation. So it's sad for those Russians who care about democracy. I'm personally sad that there aren't more of those. The constituency that Navalny appealed to, or the constituency he attempted to rally, in opposition to Putin, I think responded disappointingly. I don't think that there is as deep a constituency for liberal democracy in Russia as we've always hoped there would be. I was recalling when I heard the news that at my own expense, I flew to Moscow to be present for Yeltsin's election in 1996. And it was a time when many of us were hopeful and thought that we might be entering a new era, not just in Russian political history, but in world history, in the sense that Russia could be sort of brought into the Western fold. And I think what we've all lived through in the succeeding decades is the disappointment of that dream. And it has left me with a pretty cynical view of this regime in Moscow, of course, but also what momentum or impetus there is for movement towards democracy. Some of what's been most shocking to me about the Russian people's response to news out of Ukraine is the extent to which even those who might give voice to some misgivings about Putin have clearly been hardliners and hawks on the war in Ukraine. So
it's hard to tell, isn't it, who's really responsible for there not being a democracy movement there, because
sure.
Putin is so oppressive. I mean, the fact that Navalny was in jail, it's just on its own indicator of how difficult it is. So, is there a democratic drive, a more democratic drive underneath the surface there? Well, there must be. I mean, look what happened when Ronald Reagan did bring down that wall, So, potentially, if permission is there, they will do it.
Well, the trouble, Zev, is that as many writers on totalitarianism and authoritarianism have been teaching us, the weight of 3.5 decades of incessant control of the media and stifling of vocal opposition, rigging of elections, etc., eventually takes its toll. And what I'm afraid is that we're seeing that Russian people who certainly in '96, when I was there, were full of energy and enthusiasm for a democratic future. I just don't see that same enthusiasm now. And I think Navalny, to some extent, was crying into a void, which is maybe the most tragic thing about the way in which his life has ended up.
Yeah. It is, a message that's pretty clear. I mean, this was timed, obviously, to be just before the Munich conference began. He must have had complete knowledge that his now presumed widow was going to be there. At least Putin must have known that. And along with Kamala Harris, this was a message. This was not just a assassination. This was a absolute message sent to the West that, he's serious, he's angry, he's determined to keep fighting. And along with the, almost campaign that was leading up to this with Tucker Carlson and the incredible Donald Trump claims that he would support Putin invading our allies. I mean, these are quite significant things that have happened in the last few weeks, all revolving around Russia. And as a prelude to the Munich conference, it certainly sends a saber-rattling kind of message to NATO.
I couldn't agree more. I totally agree.
It fits his MO to be so planned and so strategic. And, people think of him as being, a tyrant, but he's also a very sophisticated media manipulator. He knows exactly how to play the game, and he does a fantastic job of doing it, which we know is to our detriment, of course. Did you see the Tucker interview? Did you get a chance to look at that?
I've seen snippets. I have such difficulty watching the guy.
Yeah, it's kind of frightening when you really dig into it. When you hear about his aspirations for what he wants to see going on in the future, they certainly don't include any form of a superpower called the United States of America. Maybe a power, but not a superpower. And of course, that's wishful thinking, but it is what they're aiming for. He and she and the enemies of democracy. That seems to be what they are trying to do. And they seem to have co-opted our entire Republican Party. I mean, the antics of the last few days with Speaker Johnson, who has a lot of priorities he could choose from. To choose the Ukraine aid as the hill to die on is remarkable to me as a thing to. And you think about the number of things he could fight about. Clearly, he is openly signaling his connection to Putin, and and we know that it exists. We know that two of his previous funders, who funded him $37,000 in previous campaigns, are close to Putin. I mean, seriously close to Putin, like his former chief of staff and one of his former best friends. So, it's not hard to imagine a world where you've got not only Donald Trump telling the GOP House Speaker what to do, but also Vladimir Putin, maybe through Donald Trump or through whomever, also telling the House Speaker what to do. And that's kind of a terrifying thought when you think about it.
I would sharpen your point by noting that Johnson's refusal to bring the Senate's Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan aid bill to the floor of the House is in the teeth of, or in defiance of, clear GOP support for that bill. It would pass with substantial GOP votes if it were brought to the floor. Which is to say to me that Johnson is, in defying that support from within his own party, he's punctuating, or he's putting an exclamation point at the end of the demonstration that you say he's making of his support for Putin.
Yeah, he really is.
It's really, in normal political terms, it's way, way beyond the pale.
And this is why I'm very excited you came on tonight, because here we are in the last maybe February's got 9 months to the elections, and a lot can happen in those 9 months. We certainly know that the election will really only get going in the last 6 months or so. We've seen what has happened in elections in the past. We've seen those October surprises. You talk about the ending of the start of Nixon's career as a president. It happened with the what was the name of that affair? It's I want to say Chinook, but that's a helicopter up here in Canada. The
Checkers.
No, it was the other affair. She was the intermediary between the Vietnamese and the Chinese, and basically Nixon used that as a way to get Johnson, to make sure the end of the war came after Nixon was elected, not.
Oh, it was Chiang Kai-shek's wife.
Yes, I can't remember her name now; it just slips my mind.
Madam something or other.
Yeah, I'll find it here while we chat. But it's happened there. It certainly happened when Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter were handing over because of the Iranian hostage crisis. We've had some pretty suspenseful, October surprises involving some pretty major foreign powers. We're knowing the propensity for people like Rudy Giuliani to be involved in these things and Roger Stone to be involved in these things. And, considering where the world is looking, where we've got wars in Gaza, you've got wars in Ukraine, and potentially a war developing in Taiwan. I mean, these are all kind of devastatingly difficult for us, and also opportunities for any foreign player to throw a curveball in the elections. Basically talking about a wag the dog kind of scenario. As you look at each of those situations, you look at Ukraine and potentially Taiwan and especially Israel, which you're so familiar with. A lot could happen there, right? That could really change the dynamic between now and the November elections.
Well, that's clearly the case. I put nothing past Trump, and I do believe he's the key player on the GOP side. It's unclear to me with respect to Johnson's moving of the Ukraine aid bill. It's unclear to me to what extent that's at the behest of Trump. It's obviously at the behest of Putin, but the question is whether the message is being passed through Trump or whether Johnson has his own channel of communication and is taking signals from Moscow himself. But nevertheless, I think Trump is the one around whom all of the other GOP players dance, perhaps to some extent out of fear, but mostly, I think, out of the realpolitik that, like it or not, Trump or his endorsement of GOP candidates continues to be essential for their success and for their fundraising. And he really has them in a headlock. And he, for reasons that I think are obvious, does not want aid to Ukraine. And it is clearly a continuation of Trump's attitudes and actions towards Ukraine that go back to impeachment 2.0 or 1.0, and to the subtraction of Ukraine aid as a platform in the as a plank in the Republican platform at the Republican National Convention in July of 2016. It's been a consistent theme all the way through. You can sort of hang around that all of Rudy Giuliani's activities and others in Ukraine. But Ukraine has been kind of the bellwether for Trump and his fealty towards Putin. And he's still very desperate to deliver on that. And it's very, very dangerous for us as a country and for NATO as an alliance and for Western democracy.
Well, let's look at that one specifically then a little bit further. So say we don't send the aid to Ukraine, that, Johnson's perseveres here and there's no further aid going to Ukraine, and that Ukraine is ultimately lost in that situation. One would think to the Russians, they've already lost, I believe, or about to lose a town in that they had previously been holding to the Russians in the military field today. So, if that's actually a reality of what's happening in the field, if the lack of artillery that's arriving from the United States is that slow that they're losing strongholds, they say within 6 months they could be losing all their supply, then we could be seeing in 6 months a situation where before the elections come around, that Putin is now the new owner of Ukraine and looking elsewhere, looking towards Lithuania, Poland, Sweden. Who knows where he's looking?
I'm not one to comment about, the stockpiles of artillery shells in Russia or in Ukraine, and how close to the bottom of the barrel the Ukrainians are. But clearly, at least the message from our administration and the message from the Ukrainians and other European leaders is that the situation is, if not desperate, then very serious. And it's a shame, a real shame on us that we're not contributing to the effort. I saw today that there is an agreement from Macron and I think Germany of a combined, I think 79 billion euros. I may have that number wrong, but it's large. That they're going to make an immediate allocation. Much of that money, I think, unless it has strings tied to it by the Europeans, some of that money may even come back to Lockheed and other people here, as it would with any U.S. appropriation. A significant amount of that money would be invested in our economy. My sense is that
John willing to let go. That's probably a good sign that these alliances have held throughout, and are still holding.
I think so. The more realistic prospect, if the Ukrainian war effort really is strangled by mainly our absence in the donor circle, the more realistic prospect is not sort of an immediate collapse and Putin victory, in 6 months or something, but a much more protracted and brutal, grinding kind of a war, which is very, first of all, tragic in terms of the human toll, but also very destabilizing as it goes on. It's very destabilizing all across Europe, and I think the way to finish this is to do it swiftly. And until very recently, I think the Ukrainians were building a very strong advantage. The other thing that would happen if the war were to become more strung out, protracted, is that the enormous troop losses that the Russians have suffered would gradually be resupplied, that they would rebuild the army. and we really cannot leave them the time to do that.
No, and they're also building as is the United States, a supply chain for weapons, which is, we don't necessarily want that to keep growing. Then there's Taiwan, which is hanging out there as a real possibility of still a conflict there. I mean, whether it involves actual U.S. boots on the ground, I doubt that, but it certainly could be the same kind of scenario where there's support structures and artillery and other stuff that might be applied there. Hopefully, that can be taken care of in other ways. You would think that situation does not seem to need to go to war, but I've often wondered, and maybe you can help explain this to me. Why does this have to mean war? Why can't the Taiwanese and the Chinese come to a conclusion that maybe there is a way for them to live together? And why does America need to be so involved? And I know we've said we were committing to be on their side and defend them, but the realities of the situation might be very different today than they were when we made that agreement.
No, I think the realities already are quite different, and it is to some extent an anachronism. Harking back to even the pre-Vietnam period, but certainly the Vietnam period, in which the U.S. military effort in Vietnam was sold in part on the basis of a domino theory that if Vietnam fell, then it was all sort of a Chinese conspiracy all across Southeast Asia. And in that sense, China was an enemy until the Kissinger-driven Nixon opening to China. The period in which that line was drawn in the sand and we pledged to defend Taiwan, I think comes out of that period. And we're clearly not in that sort of a situation anymore.
The times are very different. And then there's Israel, which of all the sort of October surprise kind of things that I could see happening, Israel is and what's happening in Gaza is turning out to be one of the possibilities that could be quite likely, because Bibi is in no rush here. Bibi is not in any need to get a peace deal done or anything done, because the longer this goes on, the more he stays in power, the more he can hold on to the grip of power. And he's certainly the urgency around peace talks, as they were happening, although they've been scuttled now, but when they were happening, came from America. It's America's urgency. It's Biden's urgency to have talks resolve that situation there, and that's a very not a great place to be heading into an election with a war that size and involving those players. Anything could happen during an election where people want to have influence.
Well, first of all, it's very volatile. The whole region is a tinderbox, in my view, and it's very, very worrying. I will take you up, I think, on the suggestion that Bibi is prolonging the hostilities and has no interest in peace talks, in part, or perhaps mostly, because it enables him to hold on to power, knowing that sort of on the, quote, day after, all of the opposition forces will coalesce against him, or that's the hope that they would.
Right.
I think it's slightly different than that. If you look at Bibi's entire political history, he's been deeply, ideologically, vehemently opposed to anything approaching a two-state solution. He returned from the Oslo Accords, and there are candid video recordings of him speaking to family members, apparently in somebody's apartment, about how he outfoxed the U.S. and inserted all these weasel words, and he has no intention of returning any settlements to Palestinian Authority, et cetera, et cetera. You can listen to what Carter said about dealing with him, what Clinton said about dealing with him. He's been a royal pain in the ass, and it's all around this kind of irredentist insistence on a single state from the river to the sea. And what I see going on in Gaza is, and ministers of his have said so overtly, is that this is in fact a form of ethnic cleansing and a retaking of Gaza to be integrated into Eretz Israel.
That does seem to be what they're trying to do there. I mean, at first they seem to have different objectives. But it was interesting to hear that Blinken told Bibi that Blinken was more concerned about the Israeli hostages than Bibi was. That tells you a lot about the state of play on the ground there. So this is about as unsettled a world as you could possibly imagine to be heading into an election season. And on top of that, you've got one of the election candidates, likely candidates, is clearly a Russian plant of some sort. Donald Trump has affiliations with Russia that we've been proving up and down for the last, for the last 8 years. I can't believe I'm saying it's 8 years, but it's 8 years. And then on top of that, you've now got, a pretty effective machine that they've built around him, which has been discrediting Joe Biden to a point where he can't seem to get above a certain level of support yet. I'm sure he will by the time he gets closer to that. But this is not a comfortable chessboard.
Well, no, it hasn't been a comfortable chessboard since about 2015, at least as I reckon it. And with the world as topsy-turvy as it is, in my view, the sort of experience and level-headedness of Joe Biden is more important than ever. It's inconceivable that we would return Trump to power to face all of these crises, particularly knowing what we now know about his attitude towards some of them. The statement he made 10 days ago about the apocryphal, I'm sure, story of some European leader having stood up in a meeting with him and said, "Sir, are you saying that if we don't pay what we owe," as if they actually owe anything in the way that he portrayed it, that you won't defend us? And he said, if you're telling me that you haven't paid, then yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. In fact, I'll go further. I'll tell the Russians, do whatever the hell you want. For an American president to say that, not only in public and on the record, but, to a vast and cheering throng, is deeply, deeply shocking and worrying. And it tells me that we've arrived at a place in our politics which is unprecedented. And enough Americans who care about democracy need to put their backs into all of the sort of grinding work of supporting individual candidates. We need to take back the House. We need to reelect Joe Biden, and we've got to keep control of the Senate. It's just
a must happen, right? But there's no certainty about that.
Important election I've been closely following and then closely involved in campaigns since I was about 16. And this is by far the most worrying and important.
I'm of the belief, and maybe you agree with this, I don't know, but I believe that, there is a lot of coordination going on between what I call the enemies of democracy. This coalition of nation states and networks and institutes and interests, whatever you want to call them, that have, basically decided they've had enough of democracy and are wanting to destroy it and America. And when I look at these hotspots around the world, it looks to me like there is a lot of coordination and that all these things are happening to some extent in order to weaken the United States, that they're, maybe each on their own have their own reason for being, but taken as a totality, what they really are trying to do is weaken our military, weaken our abilities to engage in solutions around the world and to provide leadership around the world, and to, along with dividing us in the United States, but weaken us globally with all these distractions and all these complicated factors that, they are fully aware that they are inflicting on us. Do you think that theory is true? Do you think that that's what's going on? And if it is, what can be done about it?
Well, it's not unlike the dynamic between the USSR and the US at the height of the Cold War. It's just that this time it's kind of a multi-fronted contest. I don't think if by coordination you mean that they're huddling somewhere in a back room, or there's channels buzzing and they're saying, I'm going to do this, so next week after that, why don't you do that? I don't think that, but it's not necessary because they read each other's moves. they see the openings that somebody else has provided, and within their own sphere of activity, they can then sort of take a step.
Yeah.
So I think it's spontaneous rather than coordinated, or coordinated in a spontaneous way.
Mhm. But
But
they
it's
sort of know
clear
what they're
that
going for. They sort of,
it's clear that we're fighting a sort of rising tide of rightist, populist, ethnic nationalist, anti-democratic forces, in many places, including in Western countries.
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
exactly right. Um, I could keep talking to you for a long time. I know I only asked you to commit for this amount of time, so
sure.
we can wrap up fairly soon. But what when you're looking at the world right now, what are the things that what's the stories that are most impacting you today that you're thinking about? Boy, things have changed. Is it the Donald Trump story? Is it the Fani Willis story? Are there stories outside of this foreign realm that you're also thinking, well, these are game changers?
Well, I'm these days primarily focused on domestic U.S. politics and the way in which the landscape is being arranged for November. And I'm hoping that the drumbeat of news that has already been generated, but much more of which will be generated through these trials of Donald Trump, which I'm confident will happen. I see frequently on Twitter posts by people saying, you're a babe in the woods if you think he's ever going to come to trial, let alone go to prison. But I think there will be trials and there will be important revelations. And I'm hopeful that at the margins, I don't expect some wholesale, reversion to mean of the sort of MAGA crowd. They're not all suddenly going to wake up in the morning and say, we've been wrong. My God, we've been wrong. But I hope that at the margins, enough sensible people who traditionally have voted GOP because that's what their fathers and grandfathers did, that enough of them will finally say, you know what, I just can't. And that will be enough to swing the election, together with all the other vote segments that we think we can count on in the Democratic Party. That's a very important development because we've got to begin the process of pushing this MAGA fanatic, alternative facts, right-wing crowd back to the periphery of our politics, or else we're going to be mired in the kind of situation that we're in today.
Mm-hmm. No, we absolutely do. This is it, right? It has to be this election, and this will be the end of it. When one would hope,
Well, I just jump in to say I don't think that it's going to be, quote, the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're in a protracted struggle, but I said we have to, with this election, make a decisive turn and start to push them back to the periphery. It'll take a while to do that because they've bred up now at least 2 generations of politicians. All of their bench, the aspiring candidates, the sort of the junior varsity level guys who are coming up, are imbued with this, and it's going to be a task, and it may take a decade or more to relegate them finally to the relatively insignificant status that they had until, Newt Gingrich.
Well, even right now, we know that they are probably about 25%, 30% of the population at best.
Right. Well, it's because of this, incredibly anachronistic and infuriating institution called the Electoral College.
Yes. And we've somehow managed to have them, I don't know how they've done it, but they've managed to commandeer the House speakership. And so, there's a sort of a Dave Troy likes to call it a tyranny of the minority you hear, where they've just got, these powerful, but kind of crazy people holding power simply because they've managed to, take our democratic norms and our democratic rules and manipulate it for their own benefit.
Yeah. Well, we've had crazy politicians before. What we haven't had is an entire significant segment of the voting public who are acting like the people who followed Jim Jones into Jonestown and drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is driven by media. We're in a different media environment. There's different technology. The old media structures are breaking down. And we have really seen a tremendously successful indoctrination of a significant part of the population. And that is, among other things, going to take a while to reverse also.
Yeah, there's a lot of work ahead for all of us. Well, let's leave it there tonight. Rick Petrie, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Great talking to you, as always.
Yeah, I loved having you on the show, and thank you for agreeing to come on at late notice. Your insight is always so valuable. Is there anything you'd like to talk about and promote? Anything you'd want to share with our audience?
No, I'm done.
You're done. You're done.
I'm done.
You deserve it. Have a great weekend. We'll see you.
You too. You too. Hope to see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care.
Rick Petrie joining us on Narativ tonight. I'm going to just quickly close off here by saying that we are so thankful to you for being here. And if you are a supporter of Narativ, we'd appreciate it if you put some money behind your support. You could do that by signing up for subscriptions at Patreon or Substack or on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube right now, just click the join button and join from there. Trying all sorts of new technology out today. Some of it's working, some of it isn't, but we were live for the first time in a long time. So I appreciate you being here. Tonight's show obviously began very poignantly with Alexei Navalny's widow, talking about her belief that Vladimir Putin should pay for her husband's death, if it in fact turns out to be true. And we'd just like to say that this show is dedicated to Alexei Navalny, as is the spirit of all our shows here on Narativ, where we are trying to defend democracy and freedom, no matter where it is around the world. Alexei Navalny was a hero, a great man who was able to turn a YouTube channel into a movement, and who has been able to, fundamentally change thinking in Russia. He'll be sorely missed amongst the opposition leaders. And we can only hope this is not the start of even more assassinations of leaders by the Putin regime as he consolidates power. Certainly there's no room for any of that. On that, I will leave you tonight. I thank you all for being patient with me as I've been off for the last few weeks, dealing with some personal family issues. I am working hard to make it back to normal, and we shall do that as we return next week at a regular time, Thursday night at 9 p.m. Thursday night at 9 p.m. We'll see you again next time on Narativ. As always, you can follow me on Substack, Twitter, and anywhere else you may find me on other social media.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narativ, where truth lives.